investigation has taken place into exactly what happened during that gas attack?
No, I think it would have been desirable to have an impartial investigation of the attack first, as they were discussing in the Security Council. Because now what we are hearing is one story from Damascus, another from Moscow, another one from Washington. And I'm inclined to believe nobody. I'd like to see an impartial investigation. However, it's done. It's done. And now it's a question, where do we go from now? And I think the major question is, how do we get back to talks about peace again, about a ceasefire? Because Lavrov and the Russian Foreign Minister and Kerry, when he was still there, they were doing very well, I think, but it crashed. And now it's a little harder with this harsh words in Washington and strong words in Moscow as well. But they need to get back to Geneva and to talk.
Sure. There's an awful lot of scepticism, isn't there, as you mentioned there, on all sides. Do you think people have the right to be sceptical of US intelligence when they say, we know exactly what happened, we have the evidence, but we're not going to tell you, given your experience of what happened in Iraq?
Well, my skepticism is rather strong. After my experience in the Iraq War, the U.S. intelligence was not correct there. On the other hand, the explanation that came, I think, from Moscow, that this had been a supply of chlorine or sarin on the ground, and that some bomb had hit it and then spread it, that doesn't sound terribly convincing either. So I think on balance, I would be inclined to think that a Syrian government air force was dropping barrel bombs that contain both sarin and chlorine. However, that needs to be investigated. This is my hunch, but I'm not sure. It could be different.
And historically, I mean, not so long ago, just 3 years ago, we were told that Assad's chemical weapons have all been given up and destroyed. How difficult, I mean, given that that was said at the time, why do we now assume that he still has them?
I think it was a terrific operation that the US and Russia together managed to get going with the decision of the Security Council and setting up a force under the UN and the Chemical Weapons Organization in Netherlands. And they sent out these people from the UN and they removed an enormous quantity of chemical weapons in the midst of a civil war. Now, the OPCW never said that they had got all. And we cannot be quite sure that the Assad regime, that they declared all of it. But still, we know that tremendous quantities were shipped out, and that was great. It was an exceptional result of a US and Russian agreement, and that's what we would like to see again.
We know that accusations, we keep saying, on all sides, and also the use of chemical weapons on all sides, including rebels too. Why do you think we haven't seen calls, though, for independent investigations when it's claimed that rebels have used chemical weapons?
Well, I think the Security Council has established that chemical weapons have been used on both sides. But mostly what I've heard about is not sarin, but about chlorine, which is a much easier substance to get hold of and to fabricate. Sarin is something that I suspect they would have to have stored somewhere. And it's conceivable that it was remnant and not declared or not in the possession of the government forces before. However, I doubt very much that these sarin could have come from Iraq, because UNSCOM was there, the UN inspections in the 90s, and they took out enormous quantities, and we were there, my inspectors, in 2002 and 2003, and I don't think even the American military suspected that anything could have trickled out from Iraq. So I think it came from inside Syria.
We've heard from a UN spokesperson, Hans, about the legality of the US use of force against the Syrian government. I'd like to get your views on this, but first we can just listen to what was said.
We're not going to get into the issue of legality or not legality. I would refer you back to the statement.
Why is that?
That's our position at this point.
Why do you think people are so reluctant to talk about legality? Why has the UN abstained from commenting on that when it should be, if it's law, quite clear-cut, shouldn't it?
Yes, the UN Charter prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of other states. And the US is not at war with Syria, so they should not attack them. They have not until now really attacked in this manner. They have been engaged in attacking ISIS and the Syrian government has not objected to that. But really, U.S. would have needed an authorization by the Security Council, and that was missing. So this is a unilateralism, and unilateral of the same kind that many in the U.S. wanted in 1913 after the attack outside Damascus. And I think thereby one undermine, they might say that the Security Council may be blocked and we don't get anywhere, the UN is paralyzed. However, any time that a big power ignores the Security Council and ignores the Charter, they are also undermining the organization. And that is regrettable. We would need to have more power there. We also need better cooperation between the great powers in there. It's their duty. They represent the world and the world force in the Security Council. So I think we all expect them to get together and act on behalf of all of us, rather than to be rude to each other.
Are you optimistic that could happen, though, Hans? Because we see the G7 sort of meeting at the moment. We've got Rex Tillerson appearing in Moscow tomorrow. Do you fear there could be quite a hard line coming from the G7 countries?
Well, yeah, I think, yes, it's harder now after the attack. First of all, after the use of the chemical weapons, and secondly, after the U.S. Attack with the missiles. It's harder, but it has to go there. What is the alternative? Is the alternative that the U.S. will go in even more deeper, having some zones that they wouldn't allow anybody to get in? The war will then go on simply. I think everybody has to sit down and sit back and say this was terrible intermezzo that occurred, and we have to get back to creating peace. I do think that Assad, in such a transitory regime, is probably so hated in so many quarters that it will be difficult to have him as heading the Syrian government. But the Alawites that are in control, they are a big part of the Syrian society, and they certainly will have to be there, just as the Kurds and many of the Sunnis. This is the composition you will have to have.
OK, look, Hans, we have to leave it there, but fascinating to talk to you. Really appreciate your time tonight. That was Hans Blix, former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, in Germany, the military is looking at 275 suspected right-wing extremists in its